I wish to speak on the theme of creativity, idealism, and realism. It's important that in life we need to be people with great ideals, but without being idealistic. Real idealism is realism in truth. And so in today's gospel, we have the scribes and the Pharisees. The Pharisees were people who believed in the ideals of the Mosaic law. They sought to live according to the Mosaic law. They strived to live meticulously according to the law of Moses. And it was important for them that these ideals enshrined by the law of Moses must be kept to the letter. And in order that the law of Moses would be truly kept, they have to also try to extrapolate all the specific situations in which the laws of Moses could be applied. And this was the task of the scribes. And this is what we call the oral tradition, interpreting the laws of Moses for every concrete situation according to their time. Yet for the Pharisees, we can understand why the laws were so important to them, because they were really idealists, in the sense that they call themselves Pharisees, that is, that they are separated from the ordinary people. They strive to be truly different from pagans because they were a covenanted people, the people of God. And in particular, in today's gospel, the real issue at hand was the Sabbath law. Of course, the Sabbath law is one of the 10 commandments in the Decalogue. You must keep the Sabbath holy. This is the basic principle. And you shall rest on the Sabbath day. That is the other part of this principle of the Sabbath law. In itself, it looks simple, but actually, the Sabbath law, when it comes to applying it in concrete situations, becomes extremely complex. What does it mean, really, to keep the day of the Lord holy? What is required to keep the day of the Lord holy? What does it mean that you must rest on the Sabbath day? What is the meaning of rest? How do you define rest? The Sabbath law says you cannot work on the Sabbath day. What do you mean by work? How do you define work? How do you define rest? Life, as I've said, something simple. When you really go into the details, it becomes extremely complex. So the scribes and the Pharisees were trying to apply this Sabbath law. So what do you mean when you say you cannot work? What is work? So they have to make a definition. Work means you have to expend your energy. So which means to say work, therefore, would be defined as doing unnecessary things. What is this unnecessary thing? Again, in life, that is, again, a very complex question. In the question of today's gospel about saving life, can you save life on the Sabbath? They say yes, but there's a qualification. You cannot just do everything to save a life. So a person who is in danger of death, let us say, so the scribal law would prescribe. If a person is in danger of death, should you therefore do something to heal the person? Yes, if you think the person can get better. But if the person is going to be the same, you should not do anything. So, in other words, don't do anything beyond what is absolutely necessary to save life. Now, of course, you can save your cattle that falls into the well. You have to save because that one costs money. So it was this kind of inconsistency that became very rigid and legalistic. And so, precisely in the case of today's gospel, they were watching to see whether Jesus would heal the man with the withered hand. They wanted to find fault with Jesus. So we see that on one hand, the Pharisees were truly people who wanted to keep the laws at all cost, to be faithful. Now, Jesus, he also believed in the laws. Jesus says, I have come to fulfill the laws. But the laws for Jesus must be kept not just according to the letter, but according to the spirit of the law. So what is the spirit of the Sabbath law? For Jesus, the spirit of the Sabbath law, we observe the Sabbath law in a creative way. We observe the Sabbath law because God is the author of life. We are not the author of life. We cannot control life. And so the Sabbath is important to help us to remind ourselves that God is in charge of this creation, that our life belongs to Him. And therefore, to honor God, to give glory to God, is to remind ourselves who we are, that we are finite. We are not our own creators, so to speak. No matter what we do, there are many things that depend on the grace of God. So don't think, therefore, that because you have power, you got money, you got position, you are that powerful. You realize that you are not that powerful after all. And then the question of resting on the Sabbath. For Jesus, to rest on the Sabbath is not just a question of you cannot do any work. You cannot do any work that does not promote life. So you cannot do anything that is solely for making profits, making money. Rest is important for the person's health, because if there is no rest, the body will break down. And to rest means to trust in God as well. So resting is good for the person physically, for his health, but at the same time, rest is important insofar as it generates life. So when you rest on the Sabbath, it generates life. But resting doesn't mean to say, so on Sunday, 24 hours on the bed, cannot move. So your body needs to move as well. So sometimes we need to do some activities. It's resting in the sense that it is helping you to grow in life. It is life-giving. That is why we can do good works on Sunday. So Jesus, therefore, he was clear. He was very creative in presenting his thoughts about the Sabbath day. And so what did he do? He brought the man to the center. And because they were watching him, he said to the man, the leader, stand up in the middle. Why? Because you see, the problem with most of us is this. We tend to make decisions sitting on our armchair. That's the whole problems with leaders today. They do not know what is happening on the ground. They are reading some books and some surveys, and all surveys have very narrow objective. Surveys don't explain everything. But we read books and we have lots of information, and then we make policies based on those things that we have read. But there is a lack of ground experience of really meeting the people and hearing their challenges, hearing their struggles. And so a danger, therefore, for those of us who are leaders and armchair leaders, where we are not connected with the lives of our people, then our policies would not really move them and change them. And so true, the legalism of the Pharisees, the way the laws were being applied, was almost impossible for the ordinary people to observe them. Otherwise, you cannot live. If you cannot trade, if you cannot do this and that, it's impossible. The poor people don't have that luxury of doing nothing and so on. They need to look after themselves. They don't have servants, So, that's the first thing. Jesus put the man at the center. Why also? So that when we look at the man with the withered hand, when we come into contact with the man with this withered hand, then we will not just use our mind to rationalize. We use our heart to feel. It's very easy. If your life is very comfortable, everything is provided for, to sit in the armchair and make decisions, that is very easy. Because it doesn't affect you. You are not the one having the issue. You are not the one going through the struggles. So we can make very objective, means distancing ourselves from the problem. So we have no connection to the problem. We are not affected by it. We make beautiful, logical decisions. But again, it does not attend to the lives of our ordinary people. So in this case, when we see a man with a withered hand, so Jesus hoped, therefore, that the Pharisees, their heart would be softened. That's why I say sometimes we make beautiful laws and logic, like sometimes they say, if you go to church, the Mass is so powerful already. Then after Mass, these people still ask for blessing. Tell them, Jesus, the Eucharist, they receive enough. Why would you ask for blessing? But suppose it is your father who is very sick. Your father going to the hospital tomorrow. Wouldn't you ask for a blessing? So life is such, if it's your loved one who is sick, you won't delay. Come back another day. That is what the Pharisees is telling Jesus. Tell him to come back another day, not the Sabbath day. But when you're in pain, you don't tell a person, come another day. If I can do it now, I will do it for you. If the person is in pain and that is your loved one, immediately you will help. That is the truth. That is the reality. So look at the Pharisees. Instead of opening their hearts, we are told they said nothing. Their hearts were hardened. They could not open themselves. They could not go beyond the ideals that they have. And that's why Jesus grieved to find them so obstinate. And not only they can see how hardened their hearts were, and they were totally illogical. That is the irony of it. Here, on one hand, they were against Jesus for breaking the laws. On the other hand, they went out to plot with the Herodians. Herodians were people who collaborated with the Romans. And the Pharisees were pure nationalists. To collaborate with the Romans is against their faith. And yet they were plotting with the Herodians. Number one, that is wrong. Number two, to kill Jesus. That is against the law. Thou shalt not kill. So, when people who are too idealistic, too legalistic, they do not really understand the real situation. Look at David in this first reading. He was creative. He was a little boy, and he wanted to challenge a Philistine. And King Saul said, "Oh, you cannot make it, You are fighting against a warrior." But he was creative. He knew that the strength does not come just from using might. It's using creativity. And he used the stone and a pellet in order to kill the Philistine. And so let us, even as we strive to build the church, yes, we must be creative. We must have ideals true. But our ideals must also be realistic. It must be based on what the situation is going, and then we find creative ways to respond to the challenges in our lives.